It's pretty urgent for Georgia Tech. The Coastal favorites heading into the season lost to Duke, so they can't suffer a second consecutive loss, you would think, as North Carolina comes to Atlanta coming up this Saturday. Heels and Georgia Tech. We got Mike McDaniel from inside the ACC to help us break it down. And Mike, let's start with the North Carolina quarterback position, because fully entrenched starter Marquise Williams, 22 touchdowns, 9 picks, 13 rushing touchdowns last year. Big season coming into his 4th year at North Carolina. Stumbled out of the gate against South Carolina. Didn't have a great game. Threw 3 picks. They only scored 13 points in that game. He's not had a great start to the season, although the Illinois game was pretty good. Then he wasn't able to move the ball, and Mitch Trubisky comes in, highly regarded recruit, and could shake things up at North Carolina.
Yeah, so the South Carolina game, Williams was uncharacteristically terrible. Had those 2 really bad red zone picks that were an issue there, and I thought it cost the Tar Heels the ball game in the opener. North Carolina A&T, they play them the following week, and Williams posts a pretty good game, but remember who they're playing. He goes 15 of 20 for 211 and a couple touchdown passes. So, and then the Illinois game, like you spoke to, pretty solid again, over 200 yards passing and 3 touchdowns. Well, then all of a sudden against Delaware, it's a game in the rain, the weather is iffy, and he comes out and goes 6 for 12 out of the gate for 65 yards. He doesn't turn the ball over, but he's also not moving the ball very well either. And then enter Mitch Trubisky, who's a sophomore. Now, Williams apparently tweaked an ankle, and they didn't want to run him back out there with the weather being the way it was. But then I thought it was interesting in the postgame that after that was reported, Larry Fedora comes out and says, oh, well, Williams could have played if he had to, but we wanted to rest him and we needed a spark anyway. Here's Mitch Trubisky. Kid's a sophomore, absolute stud coming out of high school like you spoke to. He goes 17 of 20 for 312 yards and 4 touchdowns in the second half and provides the spark that they need. Records the highest passer rating in school history at 282 and has a 94 and 94 odd, QBR for the game. So, raise your hand if you thought Mitch Trubisky was going to come in against North Carolina at the part that mattered. He came in the game when nobody was really expecting him to. Sure, if North Carolina has a game in hand, yeah, throw Mitch Trubisky out there, see what he can do when you're up 63-10. But that wasn't the case. He came in, played meaningful snaps, and played very well for a North Carolina offense that was looking for a spark. So whether or not they roll Mitch Trubisky this week kind of remains to be seen. But I think that North Carolina now has an idea of who to go to if Marquise Williams comes out of the gate struggling again, because I think Mitch Trubisky kind of surprised even Larry Fedora with the way he played last week against Delaware.
Yeah, Marquise Williams, as we mentioned, a dual threat guy. Trubisky, not so much, but he's probably, even at this point, despite the lack of reps compared to all the experience that Williams has, probably a more polished passer. We saw Notre Dame rip up Georgia Tech downfield with big passing plays, so Trubisky may get his shot against the Yellow Jackets in Atlanta. Elijah Hood's been a beast for North Carolina. They ripped up the Illini on the ground to the tune of 471 yards. He had a $138 against a South Carolina SEC defense, so it's a pretty balanced attack. You got Ryan Switzer on the outside, Rashad Davis as well. So North Carolina with plenty of firepower for Georgia Tech.
Yeah, North Carolina has probably the most stacked receivers in the ACC. How many different receivers are they going to throw at you? And they're all just as talented. They can all get up and down the field with speed and size. And like you spoke to, Ryan Switzer, obviously he's not the biggest guy on the squad, but 17 catches for 242 yards this year. He's making more of an impact offensively in the passing game than he has in years past earlier on. Switzer had a pretty good year receiving last year for North Carolina, even though he had a down year in special teams where he made a name for himself a couple of years ago coming in as a freshman and becoming an All-American punt returner. But Switzer has become kind of the slot receiver guy, and he's been extremely reliable with the way he's played. But they got Quinshaw Davis, they got Bug Howard on the outside. Mac Hollins has played well too. Those are all bigger receivers and tight ends there. And no matter who they throw to, they seem to go up and make a ton of plays. And, you were thinking with North Carolina's receiving core, it'd be up there with Clemson's, and then Clemson lost Mike Williams. Now all of a sudden you're looking at North Carolina as maybe the most stacked receiving group in the entire conference. So you have to be happy with the way they're playing. And it makes life much easier on a quarterback when you have a bunch of different playmakers on the outside. Now, in the running game, I'm actually a little bit surprised. I mean, I know Elijah Hood's a great player, but I'm a little bit surprised that TJ Logan has gotten off to as slow of a start as he has. Only 86 yards on the season through 4 games and has yet to score a touchdown. So I'm just a little bit surprised that he hasn't been utilized a bit more. Only has 22 carries on the year, but Elijah Hood has been so fantastic for them, 384 yards rushing and 3 touchdowns on the year thus far, that I guess, with the dual threat of Marquise Williams, you don't really have to go to Logan as much as a second running back if you have the quarterback carrying the ball just as much as a running back would. So I'm a little bit surprised in that regard, but overall, I think North Carolina's offensive attack is about how we expected, even though they've had some unexpected issues at quarterback with Marquise Williams.
Mike, we talked about it during the offseason. We also addressed it a few weeks ago. Georgia Tech, with the triple option, actually had to replace its entire backfield aside from quarterback Justin Thomas. Guys like Patrick Scove, Marcus Marshall had big games against the likes of Tulane and Alcorn State, but put them up against Duke on the road last week. Actually, Georgia Tech, for the first time in 18 games, failed to gain 200 yards rushing against the Duke defense. North Carolina, a sieve, a complete sieve last season. One of the worst defenses we've seen out of a Power 5 team in recent college football, giving up all sorts of points. I think the low light of the season was 73 against East Carolina. Much better this season. They are still giving up about 5 yards per rush, so it's going to be Justin Thomas and company on the ground against an improved North Carolina front 7.
Yeah, and in bad weather, too. So with a rushing attack like Georgia Tech's, historically, you would point to them as maybe having the upper hand. But Georgia Tech in the last couple of weeks, they've just been slowed down on defense. With the Georgia Tech, on offense. And with the Georgia Tech offense, they kind of scheme you to death there with how many different looks they throw at you with that option, with all the motions they run, all the different reads that the quarterback Justin Thomas has under center. They kind of just scheme you to death and have an ability to just make you look silly on defense, quite frankly. And they haven't made opponents look quite as bad over the last couple of weeks in the running game. And I don't know if it's something that Notre Dame did that helped Duke slow down Georgia Tech. I mean, like you alluded to, they were unable to rush for 200 yards last week for the first time in a very long time. And Georgia Tech was held over 200 yards below their season average last week against Duke. If that happens again against North Carolina, I can't see them winning. And the thing with Georgia Tech right now is that when they get behind in games, and this has always been the case with this Paul Johnson offense, as effective as it can be, they're not a good team playing from behind. And Justin Thomas, he has 6 touchdowns, only 1 interception, but he's only completed 41% of his passes. So if you get Justin Thomas in a predictable passing situation, it's not going to be good for the Yellow Jackets. He's not a passing quarterback. He's a little bit better than quarterbacks they may have had in the past throwing the football, but by no means do you want him putting the ball up more than 15 times a game. And when you take into account that a couple of those touchdown passes were garbage time touchdowns against Notre Dame when they were trying to make the contest interesting out there in South Bend, you're not all that impressed with Justin Thomas as a passer. But, rushing the football, they got Patrick Scove, Marcus Marshall, Broderick Snoddy, all the usual culprits, everybody we kind of expected to make an impact. They have. The trio combined has rushed for over 600 yards this season and 7 touchdowns. So they're a pretty solid group there at running back. And Justin Thomas, 158 yards and 3 touchdowns alone there at quarterback. So North Carolina, you would think that they have their work cut out, but maybe Notre Dame and Duke, maybe the two of them in the prior weeks are onto something. And we'll have to see if North Carolina, with their much improved defense, they're 43rd nationally in total defense this year, if they can take that into account going into Atlanta this weekend and try to play well against a very tough Georgia Tech rushing attack. Because as bad as Georgia Tech, well, not as bad, but as tough a go as they've had rushing the football over the last couple of weeks, they're due for a breakout, and they're a type of offense that can score on you in a hurry, especially if they exploit a hole in the defense.
Yeah, we've generally seen Georgia Tech passing offenses that were completely abysmal. Justin Thomas was able to do enough last season in the passing game. It wasn't efficient. It wasn't consistent, completing 51%, but 17 touchdowns, 5 picks. They had the 2 receivers that have left since then. They were able to hit for big plays in the passing game. So the passing game was effective from the standpoint that when they hit on plays, they went downfield and they gained a big yardage. And 17 TDs to 5 picks, nice ratio, the best under Paul Johnson at the quarterback position. But when you go from 51%, you can live with that based in this offense, but down to 41% passing, especially when 2 of those games were against Tulane and Alcorn State. That's just unheard of for Georgia Tech to try to survive not being able to throw the football, at least to keep the defense somewhat balanced. So do you have a feel for this one, Mike, when we got Georgia Tech hosting North Carolina and the Heels off to a 3-1 start here?
Yeah, I'm supposed to be the expert, but I'm kind of left befuddled here as to what's going to happen. With the weather the way it's predicted to be currently, it's going to be a lot of rain, that's for sure. Georgia Tech, they're a team right now that's desperate. They need a win. They've dropped their last 2. They've had a situation here where defenses are starting to maybe figure them out a little bit. And, Paul Johnson has run this offense for a really long time and nobody's really been able to stop it. And I have a hard time believing that they're going to be held down another week there on that side of the football. If the weather's bad in Atlanta, with that hurricane going up the coast, I'm not, they're still kind of unsure about it. But if the weather turns out to be bad, I think that kind of favors Georgia Tech, because they can run in any weather. North Carolina, they do have Elijah Hood, who's a very good runner in his own right, but Georgia Tech's going to be game planning to stop that. And if it gets into a situation where whoever the quarterback is, either Marquise Williams or Mitch Trubisky, has to get back there and try to throw the football in the rain, I'm more apt towards leaning towards the Georgia Tech rushing attack that, can kind of play rain or shine, if that makes sense. I just think that Georgia Tech, they take care of the football and they're a good running team. And North Carolina's defense has been much improved this year, but they also haven't seen a rushing offense like this. This triple option attack that Paul Johnson and the Yellow Jackets run, they just haven't seen anything like that so far this year. So I'm going to take Georgia Tech in a close game. They are playing at home, but by no means do I think it will be a blowout. I think North Carolina will absolutely play them tough. And I think, depending on what the weather is, I think that'll play a pretty big role as well.
I typically try to find an angle here that I can rely on rather than going with the default. Well, it's pretty much an even game. I'll go with the home team. But Georgia Tech, these are pretty solid stats. So I don't think of Atlanta and the Georgia Tech campus as being rabid football country in regards to 100,000, just a place that teams don't like to play. It's a pretty calm atmosphere, pretty subdued, and you got like 50,000. Not that they don't show up, not that they don't pack the stadium, but it's not one of the more intimidating places to play around college football. But Georgia Tech has won 8 consecutive games at home and 14 of 17. And if you take it back 17 games home, you're looking back about 3 seasons when Georgia Tech really wasn't that good, and they've been able to be a much better team at home. So I guess I take the Yellow Jackets to win. I don't see them losing 3 consecutive games, so it should be a close one with the Heels looking to go to 4-1. All right, Mike McDaniel from inside the ACC to break down UNC and Georgia Tech. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Mark.